Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ARCO Forum. I think what we are hearing tonight is left over from our political rally this afternoon. The Institute of Politics is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and our Student Advisory Committee this afternoon held here on campus certainly got to be one of the most successful events when over 3,000 students came to participate in advocacy of issues, political speeches, and registration to get voted for the fall election. But we want to welcome all of you here. As I think our audience knows, the Institute of Politics was founded as a living memorial to President Kennedy. It's a nonpartisan institute whose mission is to try to get young people engaged in politics and public service. We are particularly grateful to our speakers tonight for their taking their time to be with us. We know they have extremely pressing demands as their respective parties are contesting for hundreds of offices all across this country, and we're delighted that they are here with us tonight. This is our 30th anniversary, as I indicated, and at the 25th anniversary of the Institute of Politics, a similar debate occurred between the Republican Chairman Clayton Yeutter and the Democratic Chairman Ron Brown. The tragic death of Ron Brown this year as Secretary of Commerce, of course, is a loss of great political leadership and of a great public servant to the country, but it's a particular loss to the Institute of Politics because for the last 10 years, he was chairman of our senior advisory committee and made particular efforts to make sure our students participated in the political system. But we are grateful to have with us tonight Haley Barbour. He was elected chairman of the Republican National Committee in January of 1993. Under his chairmanship, the Republicans won the greatest midterm majority sweep of the 20th century. And by the end of Mr. Barbour's first term, the Republican Party controlled both houses of Congress for the first time in 40 years. Prior to his election as chairman of the Republican Party, Mr. Barbour had been a practicing attorney both in Mississippi and in Washington, D.C. He served President Reagan as director of the White House, White House Office of Political Affairs, and he also served as senior advisor to the George Bush for President campaign in 1988. We also have with us, of course, Christopher Dodd, who was elected chairman of the Democratic National Committee in January of 1995. Chris Dodd was elected to the House of Representatives in 1974 from the state of Connecticut and was elected in 1980 as the youngest senator in the history of Connecticut at the age of 30 to serve in the United States Senate. And we I should indicate quickly that our format, which is our order has naturally been determined by toss of the coins. Each of our speakers will make a 3-minute opening. As moderator, I somehow have been picked to ask 2 general questions of each of our speakers. Then we will have our 4 Harvard students ask, each of them will ask a question of our speakers, and then we will open in the microphones for questions from our audience, closing with 3 minutes of remarks from each of our speakers. And by the toss of the coin, we'll be delighted at this point to hear from Chris Dodd.
Thank you very much, Phil, and let me thank all of you here at Harvard at the Institute of Politics for inviting Haley and I to be here with you this afternoon. I understand why I'm here with 45 days to go. I don't understand why Haley's here with 45 days to go. Allow me to begin by, first of all, congratulating the Institute of Politics on 30 remarkable years of serving not only this university but our nation as a wonderful place in which where people who have strong political interests can gather to help refine and improve the quality of public service in this country. In an age when public service has been mocked and ridiculed by far too many, the Kennedy School is a living reminder that public service, in the words of Robert F. Kennedy, is a noble profession. And so I thank you all very much for allowing us to be here with you today. You have posed the question, which party should lead us into the 21st century? And I think to answer that question, one has to begin to identify what some of the major problems will be in the 21st century. Many of them are with us today. Obviously, the issue of population, the environment, the economy, healthcare, crime, personal security issues. I would suggest the answer to that question can best be addressed by looking at which party is helping to prepare this nation for the 21st century on those 4 or 5 very critical issues which we must come to terms with if we're going to succeed as a nation, not only in providing for the needs of our own people, but leading in a very different world than we saw over the past 50 years under a bipolar relationship. I would suggest in the economy, the Democratic Party, in its efforts on issues such as family and medical leave, child care, occupational and safety health issues, things that deal with civil rights, over the years have demonstrated that opportunity and responsibility and community have been central to our themes. In the area of the environment, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the list is rather long of efforts in which we've tried to help improve the quality of our environment. In education, the Pell Grants, work-study programs, Head Start, direct student loans, AmeriCorps, are fine examples of where the Democratic Party is trying to help prepare future generations for the needs, for the skills and education levels which they must have if we are going to succeed as a nation in the 21st century. And health care, certainly the areas of Kennedy-Casaubon legislation, where we recently saw significant opposition from Bob Dole and the Republicans. In each of these areas, we have seen an effort to try and come up with progressive, thoughtful ideas that increase opportunities and provide the nation with the ability to grapple with the issues that we are facing and will obviously face. And in every single one of the examples which I have cited, the Republican Party in recent years have fought on every single one of those issues, either to defeat those proposals or to substantially amend them so that they would be less effective in terms of dealing with the problems we will face as a nation in 6 short years, and then, of course, for decades to come. So on the basic question of which party will help lead us into the 21st century, clearly the Democratic Party has, by example and leadership over the 20th century, as it is today under the Clinton-Gore leadership, preparing this nation very, very effectively for the 21st century. Is that 3 minutes?
Excellent. Seemed like 15.
It's very difficult for a United States Senator to speak for 3 minutes. I appreciate your
Amen.
Thank you, Peter.
Haley Barbour.
Well, Phil, we know that those of you who served in the House can get this done a whole lot faster.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm always glad to be with Chris Dodd, and particularly to be up here. When I was asked to come, they agreed that Chris could be my interpreter, and I said, in return for that favor, I'd try to hold him to the truth. They said we'd only have an hour. I want to say first, my hat's off to Phil and all of you with the Kennedy School and Harvard for this program and for what you do. Politics is important. It's important whether you have on Clinton Gore t-shirts and are Democrats, or whether you have on a Dole Kemp t-shirt and a Republican, because politics affects so much of us. And as we think about the 21st century and which party should lead us into the 21st century, I think that we should ask ourselves, what do we want the 21st century to be like? What do we want from government? And we Republicans believe that in the 21st century, our country will be stronger, your futures will be brighter, opportunities will be higher for more people if we have smaller, smarter government. If we have lower taxes so the people who work and earn the money get to keep more of what they earn. After all, it's their money. It's not the government's money. That the genuine welfare reform that this Congress has passed that requires able-bodied people to work, that reduces the incentives for illegitimacy, that sets time limits for welfare, that allows the states to control the welfare programs and to operate the program after having seen the federal government fail at running that system for a long time. That what we want to do for the 21st century is push power and money away from Washington and back to the people and the communities and states in which they live. Most of the issues that we'll be talking about this year in this campaign have to do with that. Taxes, that we have record high taxation in the United States today, that the typical family in America pays 38.2% of its total income in taxes. So that for 40 million households where both husband and wife work, one of the spouses, typically all of that spouse's total income goes to pay taxes. We don't think that's right. We think that America and your family will be better off if you get to keep more of what you earn so you can do more for yourself and do more with your children, with your community, your churches, your synagogue, or whatever. Today, as we debate, I hope the debate will be about issues, the issues that affect voters' families, their communities, and our country. the way to address the issues of the 21st century is in a straightforward, factual, honest way, and then to decide what is better for those families and for the communities and states in which they live, to give more of our money to government or for people to keep more money in power for themselves. Thank you.
During this section of our debate, questions will be put to our two speakers. The speaker to whom the question is put will have 2 minutes to answer, and the other gentleman will have 1 minute to respond. My questions will be of a general nature. I rather suspect our students will get somewhat more direct. They certainly do with me in the classroom. First, to you, Senator Dodd, as we go into the 21st century, many Americans have expressed a deep concern about the possible unraveling of the moral fabric of our society. They point to problems of family, crime, drugs, and any number of other social concerns. How do you see these problems? How serious, and what does your party advocate that we begin to do about them?
Well, there are serious problems, clearly, with these issues, and we see it reflected in people's concerns. In a recent survey done of members of the PTA, some 39,000, they listed a major concern, theirs, the number one concern, the lack of time that they have on their hands to spend with their families and children. Their concerns about what their children are being exposed to on television and elsewhere. So it is serious. The best way we can begin to deal with this, it seems to me, is to try and provide parents and families the opportunities to spend more time with each other, to have a stable economy, to be able to have an earning power so that they can provide for the economic needs of their families. That, to me, is the central ingredient. If you don't deal with those issues, then it seems to me you're going to have a continuing deterioration of these other problems that people so frequently want to talk about without addressing the underlying concerns they have. And there's a fundamental difference here in talking about valuing families and talking about some of the so-called family values. I mentioned at the outset of my remarks family and medical leave. I bring this up as a classic case in point, having spent 7 years as the author of the legislation in the Senate trying to get that bill passed. The simple notion that families ought to be allowed to be with each other during a time of crisis without necessarily jeopardizing their jobs. Bob Dole was the single strongest opponent. In fact, the other day advocated the repeal of the family and medical leave legislation. As we start talking about the 21st century, where you have single-parent families trying to raise children with the tremendous economic burdens, or families where there are 2 income earners that are holding 3 and 4 and 5 jobs in order to provide for the needs of their families, something as simple as family and medical leave legislation has provided great relief for families caught in that dreadful situation of having to choose between their employment and their families. And so when we have a presidential candidate here who will lead us into the beginning of the 21st century, advocate the repeal of something like the family and medical leave law, then you get a sense, I'm afraid, of a lack of understanding of what families are going through. That's the best way you can begin, it seems to me, to really deal with the needs of these families, is to address their economic concerns and the underlying problems they face and the pressures they have as families.
Phil, if you talk about declining values, the concern is government doing things that undermine values. A welfare law that was anti-family, anti-work, anti-marriage, a welfare law that the Republicans came in after Bill Clinton said for 3 years, I will end welfare as we know it, and while the Democrats had control of both houses of Congress, there was never even a vote on welfare reform. In the first few months of the first Republican Congress in 40 years, we not only reformed welfare, we reformed it in a way that was praised by governors of both parties, and yet Bill Clinton vetoed it twice. It turned out welfare reform was something Bill Clinton liked to talk about but didn't want to do anything about. We have a situation in America where government often undermines, with the best of intentions, often undermines the right kind of things for families. We see it in our tax system, we see it in our welfare system, we see it over and over, and we should dedicate ourselves to legislation that gives families more opportunities to be together, but also gives families more incentives to be family-oriented rather than relying on government.
The second question, start with you, Haley, is that as we go into the 21st century, many Americans have expressed serious concerns that we may be seeing a decline in the middle class in this country, expressed sometimes as a growing division between the haves and the have-nots. How do you see this as a problem, and how does your party approach it?
Well, under the Clinton administration, we have seen the greatest expansion of the gap between what the rich earn and the poor earn. But I don't particularly blame President Clinton for that. What I am more concerned about is how today American families are working harder than they've ever worked. Most families are earning more than they've ever earned, but they're not getting ahead. They're on the treadmill. They're going backwards. Why? Well, first of all, we do have, as Robert Reich, the Secretary of Labor, talks about, we have stagnant wages in this country. The average wage today in the United States is less than it was when George Bush was president in 1992. But that is hugely compounded by the fact that we have record high taxation in America. Today, I mentioned earlier, the typical family pays 38.2% of its total income in taxes. Since Bill Clinton was elected president, federal taxes have gone up 26%. Per capita taxation has gone from a little over $4,000 a year in the United States to well over $5,000 in the United States. We see people who are working harder, but they're going backwards, and it's because the government is taking so much of their money. Bob Dole has proposed a $550 billion tax cut, a 15% across the board for all families, for all taxpayers, $500 per child tax credit for 24 million families with 42 million children, cut the capital gains tax rate, and other taxes. Bill Clinton says we can't afford, the country can't afford to let you keep that much more of what you earn. Now the issue here is who's going to do better. Is America going to be better if families keep more money or if government gets more money? And the fact of the matter is Clinton's budget would increase spending 3% a year, Dole's budget would increase spending 2% a year, and Clinton says the government can't afford to give up that extra 1 cent a year in spending so that families can keep more of what they earn. We think that families can spend that 1% a whole lot better for themselves and their communities than the government can.
Well, first of all, I'd point out that according to Business Week, in fact, federal taxes, the only taxes that the President and the Congress are responsible for, are actually down for the first time in the past, and less than they were 45 months ago when the President arrived in Washington. Wages and earning power is beginning to move up. 10 million new jobs have been created in this country. The misery factor, which Ronald Reagan used to talk about, the combination of unemployment and inflation, is the lowest it's been in 28 years. We have reduced the federal deficit on an annualized basis from $290 billion to $115 billion, thereby lowering interest rates to such a degree that 10 million Americans have refinanced their home mortgages, saving them $25 billion in the past 45 months. 4.5 million Americans, record numbers, have made their first-time home purchases. So things are beginning to move in the right direction. Deficits are coming down. The country's getting back to work. But it seems to me if you want to close this gap, you have to make investments as well. And I find it staggering that the Republican Congress under Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole would have a $30 billion cut in education, for instance. $10 billion coming out of higher education. How in the world are we ever going to close this gap if we don't provide the educational needs of a generation so they can hold the jobs and acquire the skills that allow them to have the earning power to be able to provide for themselves and their families?
Thank you. We're now. Our panel of students tonight are all politically active here on the campus, and our first question, which will be for Senator Dodd, is from Kate Terry with the class of 99. She is a member of the Harvard-Radcliffe Republican Alliance, is majoring in history, and comes from North Andover, Massachusetts. Terry.
Thank you. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening, Terry.
The Democratic National Convention 1996 party platform states, "We need a smaller, more effective, more efficient, less bureaucratic government." But it then proposes to grant health insurance to all Americans, fund job training for those who need it, and a host of other similar causes. And these are all wonderful ideas, but I do wonder how such a smaller, leaner government could possibly accomplish all of these ideas. And even more importantly, why such a federal government would be the entity best suited to perform these functions.
Well, first of all, let me tell you that we have achieved something that Haley Barbour and my friends on the Republican side have talked about for years but never done much about. In fact, the size of the federal government under Ronald Reagan grew by 188,000 positions during those 8 years. In the 45 months that President Clinton has been in office, we have reduced the size of the federal workforce by some 240,000 positions, making it the smallest federal workforce as it compares to the overall workforce in this country since John Kennedy was president. Under Al Gore's leadership, we have, through the reinvention of government, taken out 18,000 pages of federal regulations, making government far more user-friendly to consumers in this country. I've mentioned already what has happened in terms of the federal deficit coming down so that we're managing our resources far more responsibly. We understand that in trying to provide decent health care for people, that is a good investment for people in this country. I think it was incredible that Bob Dole fought the Kennedy-Kassebaum legislation that allowed for the portability of health care coverage and to reform the insurance problems in terms of pre-existing conditions that existed. We could have done that years ago had he not stood in the way of that kind of health care reform. Seeing to it that Medicare is reformed and works well, not cutting $270 billion out of it, $162 billion out of Medicaid, when people are going to need those need that kind of assistance if they're going to be able to provide for themselves and their families in the coming years. So we have these goals because they speak to the health of a nation, to see to it that people are not worried about a health care crisis, that they get the education. The GI Bill cost a staggering amount of money at the end of World War II in Korea. Roughly $9,000 was the grant that was given to each student in this country that benefited from it. It was very expensive. In 1996 dollars, it would be hugely expensive. And yet the return on investment to this country has been 8-to-1 as a result of the education that those people received. I think that kind of an investment in the future of this country is exactly the kind of direction we need to be going in if the nation is going to be stronger and meet the challenges of the 21st century.
You know, Kate, facts are very inconvenient for the Democrats. The fact is, education spending, federal spending on education has gone up every year since Bill Clinton's been president. It went up under the Republican Congress, just like it went up under the Democrat Congress. That the Republican budget that Bill Clinton vetoed increased student loans 50%, from $24 billion last year to $36 billion in the last year of the budget cycle. It set Pell Grants at the highest level in the history of the United States, and it increased funding for the school lunch program 4.7%. Bill Clinton vetoed all that, despite the fact that his own budget increased spending for school lunches 4.7%. The Medicare budget that Bill Clinton vetoed increased Medicare spending 7% a year. According to AARP, Bill Clinton's own budget increased Medicare spending 7.8% a year. Why do the Democrats talk like Republicans? Because Bill Clinton can read a poll. And he is a master at saying whatever the polls tell him people want to hear. And the people are telling him we want smaller, smarter government. We want lower taxes because our taxes are too high and we're not getting our money's worth today.
Our next question is for Chairman Barbour. It comes from Seth Hanlon with the class of '98. He is president of the Harvard Radcliffe College Democrats, is majoring in American history and literature, and is from New York City.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. My question is for Mr. Barbour. Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Seth.
In a 1995 letter to the National Rifle Association, referring to the assault weapons ban, Bob Dole wrote this, quote, "Repealing the ill-conceived gun ban passed as part of President Clinton's crime bill last year is one of my legislative priorities. Gun control is a completely ineffective approach to the lack of safety and security in our communities." Bob Dole opposed both the assault weapons ban and the Brady Bill. It was a Democratic Congress that passed both gun control bills and a Democratic President, Bill Clinton, who signed them into law. Mr. Barbour, who has exercised true leadership in the area of controlling the proliferation of guns in America? Is leadership standing up to the NRA or pandering to it?
Leadership leadership, Seth, is always being honest with people. And the honest answer is gun control doesn't work. Washington, D.C. has the strictest gun control law and the highest murder rate in the United States. Now, if we want to do something, and we do, about gun crimes, what we should do is punish people who commit crimes with guns. Yet this administration, for the first time when Ronald Reagan was president, we passed a law that made it a mandatory minimum sentence that if a person committed a federal crime with a gun, they would automatically be put in the penitentiary for a mandatory minimum period. This administration is the first ever that doesn't enforce that. Janet Reno testified in front of the Congress against mandatory minimum sentences for gun crimes. She has told the U.S. prosecutors that they can plea bargain that away. Bob Dole says we don't need the Brady Bill when 17 states, a third of the states of the country, already have what's called instant check, where just like when your credit card gets checked when you buy your girlfriend something with your American Express card, and they run it through there, they swipe it through your through a credit card deal, that they check people's record to see if they can. This man, he's a generous guy, and don't think because he's a Democrat that he's not. He's a generous. But we already have 7 states, a third of the states in the country, that already have instant check. Their law-abiding citizens are not required to wait any period of time, but those who are criminals, who are under a court order, who are on parole, or for other reasons shouldn't buy guns, they not only can't buy handguns like the Brady Bill, they can't buy any kind of gun. And that's what Bob Dole has endorsed nationally. It's very simple. We already do it in hundreds of thousands of stores in the United States. 17 states are doing it. That's what we ought to do, and we ought to punish people who commit crimes with guns.
Well, you've raised a very important question. It's an issue that most people list as the single most important issue in many surveys done. And I find it absolutely incredible that as we're about to end the 20th century and begin the 21st century, that we'd still find the kind of opposition to just common sense legislation. Jim Brady was the press secretary for Ronald Reagan. He and Sarah Brady, his wife, have led a crusade over the last number of years to make a difference in trying to reduce the proliferation of guns in this country that threaten the lives of people. As a result of passing the Brady Bill, and we finally had an American president that would stand up to the National Rifle Association and win when it came to taking them on. 60,000 felons in this country, as a result of the Brady Bill being in law, were denied the right to get a hold of guns in the last several years because the Brady Bill became the law of the land. That's 60,000 fewer felons that were able to go out and purchase a handgun. I think that's a significant accomplishment. The assault weapon ban. What hunter would want to use an AK-47 to go out and hunt in this country with? I think it's incredible that Bob Dole. I don't know what you're hunting here in Cambridge. But the fact that you'd want to repeal the ban on assault weapons, these street sweepers that put the lives of our police officers in jeopardy every day, is stunning. We've seen real achievements being made in the area of crime with 100,000 new police officers on the street, and the statistics are there. The crime rates are coming down. The amount of violent rapes down 18%, robberies 14%, overall crime down 9%. We're moving in the right direction, and we ought to get the kind of bipartisan cooperation in this area and not go back to the days when we just open the doors and allow anyone to acquire these weapons of destruction.
Our next question will be directed to Senator Dodd, and it comes from William Zerhouni, who is with the class of '98. He is president of the Harvard-Radcliffe Republican Alliance, is majoring in economics, and he comes from Baltimore, Maryland.
Senator Dodd, good evening and welcome to Harvard.
Thank you, Bill.
Now, Seth speaks of pandering and lack of leadership, and I'd like to bring up one example with Bill Clinton and his seduction of the AARP. The most recent Medicare Trustees report has predicted that Medicare would go bankrupt in the year 2001 if nothing is done to reform the system today. Moreover, with the baby boom aging, it will not be long before Social Security payroll taxes will have to increase an estimated 100% to pay for a faltering system. It has been commonly accepted by Republicans and Democrats alike that we cannot balance the budget and protect our children's futures without curbing the explosive growth of entitlements. Furthermore, it has also been commonly accepted that entitlement benefits could be held in check while preserving a social safety net for those who need it. It used to be that children stood on the shoulders of their parents, economically and financially. Today, it seems that parents are standing on the shoulders of their children, receiving Social Security and Medicare benefits far greater than what they need and what they have put into the system. My question to you is now this. Now that your party's political standard bearer, President Clinton, has poisoned the well of entitlement reform by irresponsibly scoring political points off of Congress's modest reforms.
This is a question.
This is a question. It's time to own up to the truth, I guess. By ignoring Democratic Senator Bob Kerry's Entitlement Commission and by scaring senior citizens in the AARP, will we ever be able to attain a political climate in which entitlement reform is possible for our generation? And if so, what is the Democratic Party prepared to do to curb entitlement spending?
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for your question. And it is an important issue. And our point is this. I mean, the trustees' reports, every year the trustees have reported a crisis in the Medicare Trust Fund, going back almost to the inception of the program. And you have to take it seriously, but no one has suggested, you will not find anywhere the suggestion that $270 billion in cuts in the Medicare program were justified. The reports talked in the terms of $80 billion to $100 billion. President Clinton offered $116 billion and reduced benefits under the Medicare program. I regret that we weren't able to convince the Republicans to come together and try and come up with a program that would deal with Part A and Part B with the reforms that really needed if you're going to make the program work. But no one suggested $270 billion was necessary. Remember who you're talking about here. The average income of a person on Medicare is $17,500 a year, unless you're a woman over the age of 65, and then it's $8,500 a year. Now, maybe to Mr. Gingrich, who makes $135,000 or $40,000 a year, that $40 or $50 or $60 a month doesn't sound like much. But when those costs go up for surgery and for doctors and for medicines, that Medicare support is a vital link to people out there living on incomes that most people today would not even begin to think about able to provide for their families on. So reform is needed. We had a bipartisan commission on Social Security in the early 1980s. I would recommend we do that. But let's have some intelligent reform here and discussions about it, and not draconian cuts used to pay for a tax cut that would go to the most affluent people in this country. That is not what was necessary. Remember this. Remember this. It's one thing to reform this system. It was Bob Dole who said 1 year ago next month that he was proud of the fact he was one of 12 to have voted against Medicare in 1965. Didn't work then, it's not working now. It was Newt Gingrich on that same day who said that we're going to let it wither on the vine. Now, who are you going to trust in the future with Medicare to reform it? Someone who's proud of the fact they voted against it, doesn't think it works, someone who thinks it ought to wither on the vine, or people who have offered meaningful reform proposals to try and make Medicare work for the future?
Will, I think you asked the most important question that's going to be asked here today. And you asked a question that the Democratic Party has simply refused to tell the truth about. Again, let's talk about the facts. The fact is, according to AARP, not a Republican ally, the budget bill that Bill Clinton vetoed, that Chris Dodd talked about, increased Medicare spending 7% a year every year for the budget cycle. According to the same letter from AARP, which was written to Bill Clinton, the President of the United States, his budget increased Medicare spending 7.8% a year. That all of this wither on the vine, throw old people out in the street, end Medicare, is a big fraud. The fact of the matter is there is never in 1 year that Medicare spending would go up as much as 1% more under the Democratic budget than the Republican budget. But this has all been the campaign, that the next election is more important to the Democrats than the next generation. In the year that they prevented anything from being done about Medicare, and remember, Congress passed Medicare reform. They passed a budget that would make Medicare solvent to the year 2017. Bill Clinton vetoed it, and because of that 1 year, today, Medicare is predicted to go broke 2 years earlier than was predicted the first time Bill Clinton's trustees did this. Now, who is your friend if you're on Medicare? The one who, for political advantage, makes this about the next election and doesn't give a damn whether Medicare goes bankrupt, or the people that says, we're willing to take the political licks to stand up and do what's right, but we're going to tell you the truth about it. In the end, leadership is telling the truth.
Our next question is directed to Chairman Barber, and it comes from Lisa Maria Cabrera with the class of '99. She is secretary of the Harvard Radcliffe College Democrats, is majoring in economics, and comes from Atlanta, Georgia.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, my question is on the issue of education. Last year in Congress, the Republican budget proposed by Bob Dole and Newt Gingrich offered the largest education cuts in American history, $31 billion from programs such as Head Start, Pell Grants, and school lunches. Over his long career in Congress, the facts are that Bob Dole voted no on the first federally insured student loans, no on the direct lending program, no on the Goals 2000 Educate America Act, no on the Safe and Drug-Free Schools program, and then again, no on President Clinton's National Service Program. Mr. Barber, how can Bob Dole justify his record on education to America's students? And more importantly, how can we as students choose to vote for him over Bill Clinton, given this record?
Lisa Maria, at the Democratic National Convention, Mrs. Clinton made a speech in which she said that our education system was failing our children. At the Republican convention, many people said the same thing. The difference is, what's the solution? For the Clintons, the solution was another government program, $3.5 billion, more Washington bureaucracy. Republicans are for real reform. We are not going to solve the problems of education and make sure that our children have the educations they need in the 21st century, that they're no longer in drug-infested schools, and that parents can feel safe that their children are not going to a place that's dangerous for their own safety. We're not going to do that by more of the same. We believe in real reform. We want to give more control over education to parents, teachers, and local school boards, and less control over education to the teachers' unions and the Washington bureaucracy. Education spending in the Republican budget increased. It didn't increase as fast as Bill Clinton wanted it to increase. When you talk about $31 billion over 7 years, that is how much more he wanted it to increase. The direct student loan program costs more than the insured loan program that we have now. That's why the Republicans stopped it, but we increased the volume of student loans by 50%, from $24 billion last year to $36 billion the year 2002. You should also know that the Democratic Congress of 1993 and 1994 also cut President Clinton's requests for education spending. In each year, they cut it about $1.1 billion below what he'd asked for. It went up both years, and the Republican Congress gave him $1 billion less than he asked for last year, but it also went up. The idea that we are cutting education spending because we're not willing to increase it as much as he is a fraud. It's a very convenient fraud for the Democrats, and it's very consistent with their idea that if we'll just give the government enough of our money and enough control over our lives and business, that government can solve all our problems. We don't think so. We think we get better schools when there's more control to parents, teachers, and local school boards, and less control to the teachers' unions and the Washington bureaucrats.
They're not many, but they're long when they applaud. I know.
Right. They're energetic.
I think the best evidence I'd offer about where the Republicans have finally come on education is that on Thursday, the Republican-controlled Congress decided to go along with the Democrats on education. With 46 days to go before election, they abandoned their efforts because they finally realized they were in so much trouble with the American public on this issue. This is one issue that joins people all across this country, regardless of ideology or region, on the need to have the best educated, best prepared generation we have ever produced in this country if we're going to meet the challenges of a global economy in the 21st century. And you can cover over this all you want, but the fact is, to have a $31 billion cut in education, $10 billion in higher education, and $20 billion in elementary and secondary education. Under the House-passed bill, you would have cut 180,000 slots out of Head Start. In the Senate-passed bill, 150,000 slots out of Head Start. Everyone in this country knows that you've got to begin educating these children at the earliest possible days. Why in the Lord's name would you begin by slashing away at these children and the needs for Head Start and end up in higher education? 70% of the students at this university depend upon one form of financial aid or another in order to get an education here. The costs go up, and to say that we're going to back away as a federal government in supporting these families, hardworking students, from getting the assistance to achieve the educational standards for the 21st century, I find incredible. In the next 5 or 6 years, only 5% of the jobs in this country will be available to people with less than a high school diploma. And so we're going to need to have a well-educated, well-prepared citizenry. And you're not going to get that by walking away from the needs of elementary, secondary, and higher education. And that's what the Republican Party has stood for. You even want to do away with the Department of Education. I can't imagine in the 21st century.
I want to thank our panel of students for their participation. And now we're ready for the section of the program which you probably will not find in other kinds of political debates, certainly not in the presidential debates, because we always at the ARCO Forum allow for the participation of the audience. And for this to be effective and fair, we need your cooperation. And the way we will proceed is that we will ask our questioners to please briefly identify yourself, your association with the university, and then provide a short question which will first go to Senator Dodd, who will have 1 minute, then to Haley Barbour, who will have 1 minute. Then we will switch the order on the next question. Both gentlemen will have 1 minute to respond. So your question is actually directed in reality to both. At least both will try to respond. We'll start here with our first question.
My name is Woody Kaplan, and I'm with the ACLU. Senator Dodd.
You don't want to ask Haley this question?
Senator Dodd, the 1996 Civil Rights Bill, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, came up a week ago Tuesday in the Senate, and virtually every Democrat voted for it. Virtually every Republican voted against it. It was a bill that simply allowed lesbian and gay men to be hired on the basis or fired on the basis of merit rather than their sexual orientation. How do you explain that split in vote, Senator?
Well, it was unfortunate. The vote was 50 to 49. David Pryor from Arkansas, son was undergoing a serious cancer operation, could not be there. Had he been there, it would have been 50-50, and Al Gore would have cast the deciding vote for the legislation. It's one of the remaining areas of civil rights in this country that hasn't been covered. And to deny people equal opportunity in employment because of sexual orientation just doesn't have any place left in this society of ours. That ought to be something that Democrats and Republicans ought to be able to agree on. We provided the kinds of exceptions and so forth that people have raised in the past. But I think it was unfortunate. Log cabin Republicans, gay and lesbian Republicans, I think were terribly disappointed. This ought not to be an issue that divides us in this country. We have a lot of areas in which we can disagree. But saying to people that you ought to be able to hold a job in this country and not be discriminated and lose that employment because of sexual orientation is something that I hope we're going to be able to pass shortly.
Let me just say, for the ACLU or anybody else, one of the problems we have in this country is laws have been passed, spoken of on the floor of the Senate, that this will not create special preferences, this will not create special group rights, and then the courts have interpreted them just the opposite. I can remember Senator Humphrey standing up on the floor and saying that the voter right bill would never require proportionate representation, would never require districts to be drawn to help one group or another, and now the United States Supreme Court is having to undo districts all over the country where that's been happened. The fact of the matter is, Americans very rightly are opposed to discrimination, but they're opposed to discrimination of any type. And reverse discrimination is just as abhorrent to Americans as any other kind of discrimination. The American government The American government is not based on creating special rights for groups. Because when you quota somebody in, you quota somebody out. And if you don't think so, ask any of the Jewish Americans that you see here who were quoted out for generations in this country. Quotas are wrong, reverse discrimination is wrong, and what the federal government and all governments should do, we should prosecute discrimination. We shouldn't practice it by saying that some people have rights that are not available to everybody else.
Hi,
This will be,
Senator.
Mr. Barber will answer first.
Okay. My name's Aaron Easterly. I go to the college here. Now, a recent study put out by our own JFK School of Government about school vouchers, I believe in the inner cities in Milwaukee, showed that school vouchers actually disproportionately helped urban minorities to get better education. Their test scores went up, the amount of them that were able to afford private school went up. Overall, more of them got into college. Now, I guess my question is we all know tonight that, judging from the applause here, that the Kennedy School of Government isn't exactly nonpartisan. When a liberal foundation, rightly so, puts out a study that says how great school vouchers are at helping minorities and disadvantaged urban youth, then why is it so that so many politicians, mostly Democrats, use the cheap scare tactics of this being abusive to urban city youth and abusive to minorities, when empirically it's not?
Aaron, the fact of the matter is that school choice allows parents who are not wealthy to have the same opportunities for their children that rich people have. And it has worked. The leadership of it in places like Milwaukee, where it's been praised, has been bipartisan. Bob Dole, who benefited greatly from the GI Bill, has come out for a similar kind of program for students in high school and below, opportunity scholarships. Bob Dole understands very simply that Bill Clinton and Albert Gore should not be the only people in Washington, D.C. who live in public housing and send their children to private school.
Well, we believe that actually that vouchers and use of the public school system makes sense. Charter schools, magnet schools, trying to create some competition within the public school system makes some sense. We certainly as well support testing, transportation, where private and parochial schools are concerned, and they have played a valuable role in the educational needs of a nation. But remember, it's important here that we are in the business of supporting public education. We cannot subsidize two school systems. And there is a great concern here that if we begin to walk away from that, that students who don't have parents that are as concerned as they should be, or districts that are not as concerned as they should be, you end up creating pockets where the educational performance is so low that you create even greater disparity in our system. So we believe that moving aggressively in this area of creating and improving these systems, and a lot of them are improving tremendously as a result of the competition that exists, that's the direction we ought to be moving in, and provide where we can the kind of support and assistance for private and parochial schools so that they can also succeed in providing educational needs. But let me just say as well how disappointed I was to hear Bob Dole get up and say the problem with education were teachers, frankly. I don't think this really is teachers. We need to be attracting more people to go into the educational professions in this country. I have a sister that's taught for 35 years in the public school system, the majority of it in the last few years. I know how hard she works. She's asked today to do more things than predecessors had to do, to be a parent, to be a police officer, to be a religious leader, as well as to be an educator. It's a tremendous amount of pressure on these people in this profession. Instead of denigrating people, we ought to be trying to celebrate it, encourage people to go into it, and to try and improve it. That's our job in the public sector. Thank you.
I'll be glad not to stick to time, too, if that's going to be the rule.
We'll stick to the time. We'll ask each, and we also will ask our questioners if they will try to put the question briefly up here.
Good evening. My name is Matt Anestis, and I'm a recent graduate of the college. Gentlemen, more people in my generation believe in UFOs and believe they will receive a single dollar of Social Security. The collapse of the system seems certain, but the power of the AARP has made the issue the third rail of American politics, and as a result, neither party has addressed it. Do you believe that the Social Security system will reach a time of crisis before our nation's children have reached retirement age? And if so, what will your party do about it?
Well, the issue was raised earlier by Bill over here, raised the issue of entitlements, obviously Social Security being one of them. In 1983, there was a bipartisan commission that was formed to try and address it under President Reagan. People like Pat Moynihan and others served on it and made some significant and good suggestions. I would hope that as we look at all of these issues, we might get to that and examine exactly what are the needs, what needs there will be in terms of Social Security, so that we can provide for that safety net that people have counted on over the years. That seems to be the intelligent way to go, looking at age issues and so forth. The longevity tables are changing, obviously. Makes some sense to move in that direction. I would hope we could get there. It's been disappointing, I might say, in the last few years that we've seen these issues raised and that partisanship, some of which has been necessary because of the particular directions that people have suggested we move in. That would be my suggestion as to how we ought to try and deal with it. I think there is a very legitimate issue about the soundness of the trust fund in the coming years, and we ought to begin that process sooner rather than later.
If we're going to address these programs, Social Security, which will be solvent well into the next century, has to come second to Medicare. The Democratic Party, by policy, by outspoken statement, and by spending over $60 million in negative television advertising to attack Republicans who were willing to address Medicare's bankruptcy, a bankruptcy that was announced by the Clinton administration. It wasn't announced by the Republicans. The Clinton administration said Medicare would be bankrupt. Republicans stepped up to the challenge. The changes we proposed were mild. Increased Medicare spending at the rate of 7% a year instead of the rate of 7.8% a year as President Clinton proposed. Let Medicare Part B premiums continue to go up at the same rate they've gone up for the last 10 years. That's the way we have to deal with this. Be honest with people. Tell people we've got a terrible problem, we've got to address it, and if we will address it responsibly, the changes are not radical. Unfortunately, it looks like because of the Democratic Party's use of this as a political issue, that very few politicians are going to have the courage to do anything about Medicare, and that cannot make you confident for 10 or 15 years down the road when we're going to have to start doing the same sort of thing about Social Security.
Hello, Chairman. My name is Michael Pasanti, and I'm the political director of the College Democrats. I'd like to talk about the environment a little bit. For Senator Dodd, what, if anything, does your party plan to do about the environment? And for Mr. Barber, what, if anything, does your party plan to do about the environment?
Well, I think Chris, I think
I'm sorry.
I'm supposed to go first, and I'll give you that. President Clinton, in his acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention, got up and cited a number of things as achievements of his administration. It happens that 14 of those things were passed by the common sense Republican Congress that he and the Democrats love to hate. He went through a litany of 14 different things. The two environmental things that he cited, the Safe Drinking Water Act, was passed by this Republican Congress. The Democrat Congress couldn't pass it 2 years ago. Everglades restoration that he praised is part of the 1995 Farm Bill, which is a total change in our way of our agricultural program for the United States. And it contained changes to try to restore the Everglades. The Republicans believe we need to have a safer, cleaner, healthier environment, and that there is a right way to do it. And we have worked hard through safe drinking water, through Everglades restoration, and other legislation to try to make that happen.
Well, it's another example, frankly. I mean, we hear what they're usually against, not what they're for. And the issue on education, what they're against rather than what they were for and how they'd improve the system in the 21st century. It's been described, this Congress, led by Mr. Gingrich and Mr. Dole over the past 20 months, is probably the single most strident anti-environment Congress in memory. And certainly it's borne out by the facts. The efforts to repeal the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, it's just incredible. On the efforts on the Arctic Wilderness Area, the Tongass National Forest, in one area after another. In fact, even allowing the polluters to come in and write the legislation that would undo it. The contract with America. By the way, September 27th will be the 2-year anniversary of that wonderful document being signed into Washington. I don't hear the words even mentioned, contract with America. The Republican National Convention, I defy you to find the words mentioned there. Even Mr. Gingrich, its author, is being relegated now to welcoming volleyball players at the National Convention. They have tried to hide all of this record. And again, a good evidence of what's happened in the last few days, of course. The Republicans are now listing the Clean Water Act as one of their great achievements in this Congress. It's a dismal record. Apologize.
Question. And this will go first to Mr.
Yes.
Dunn, Senator Dunn.
My name is Byron McLean. I'm a first-year student and a member of the class of 2000 at Harvard University. Whether you are a Republican and Bill Clinton is ahead by 10 percentage points, or a Democrat and Bill Clinton is ahead by 20 percentage points, it seems as if the common phrase and the truth is that Bill Clinton is ahead. Mr. Haley Barbour and Senator Christopher Dodd, is Bill Clinton ahead in all polls due to some fault of Bob Dole, or is it because Bill Clinton better represents and articulates the ideas of the majority of Americans?
Well, let me think about that for a minute. I guess I'll take the latter part of it. I think it is because he is reflecting the views of most Americans and their desires to see someone who brings us together as a people. We're a very diverse people in this country. No other nation is anything like this in its diversity. We celebrate diversity. And I think it's been unfortunate in recent times that we still find people in public life and politics seeking to find wedge issues to divide people, make constituencies angry so that we can win votes from the angriest block of voters. And I think our great history has shown that people who seek out to find common ground between us are those that we celebrate the most in our history. And I think Bill Clinton is, aside from all the specific issues, the idea of trying to bring us together as a people is one of the reasons that he's doing as strongly as he is in the poll. Clearly, Mr. Gingrich and the leadership of this Congress have reminded people that they don't want to go back to that in '96. They bought it in '94, but they saw what this crowd would do. And but for the veto pen of this president, this nation would be in sorrier shape, in my view, than it is today because the president was there. And so I think people will vote for the president and the Democrats for those positive reasons.
Bill Clinton's ahead of the polls because for most Americans, the election's just beginning. Most people are not like us political junkies who've been paying attention to this a long time. Bill Clinton's also ahead in the polls because you have to give him credit. He's a tremendous performer. I mean, Bill Clinton stood up at his convention and talked about 14 things passed by the Republican Congress as his achievements. 7 of them, Chris, were in the contract with America. The contract with America that you didn't hear about because Bill Clinton was talking about things in the contract with America. It's his achievement. But look, give Bill Clinton credit. I mean, the man's good. I mean, he can sell Fords to Chevrolet dealers. Bill Clinton is a master at telling people whatever the polls tell him they want to hear. In fact, he's the first politician in American history who has perfected the ability to cry out of just one eye. But this will be a close election on November the 5th because people are starting to focus on the issues that affect their families, their communities, and our country.
Hi, I'm Imran Javed, another member of the class 2000, and I wish I shaved this morning. I'd like to ask both chairmen.
Not on our account, I hope.
What do the both of you identify as the major foreign policy issues that are going to face the next president, and what are your respective parties and candidates going to do about those challenges?
The biggest concern Americans need to have about foreign policy is that we haven't faced our last international crisis. That time and time again, this administration's foreign policy decisions have been almost exclusively driven by domestic political considerations. That's not right. Presidents have to be willing to do what's politically unpopular, to do what's difficult, to stand up for America's interests and our future. We can't ignore serious, difficult problems as we have in Iraq, for instance, because if you ignore hard problems, they get worse. And we're seeing that today. I saw a wonderful and awfully truthful cartoon in one of the papers this week. It had a big picture of the White House and over at a billboard that said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" And down on the corner was a great big billboard with a picture of Saddam Hussein, and it said, "Yes." We can't ignore foreign policy, but I will admit that to most people, foreign policy is not driving their voting decisions, and not as much as I would like for it to.
Well, I was just going to say it. If Bill Clinton can sell Fords to Chevy dealers, and that's a bad idea, I wish that Bob Dole could sell Fords to Ford dealers, and maybe we'd get something done in the country. Let me. Foreign policy ought to be a larger part of the debate because obviously the world we're living in is shrinking and the problems are significant. Terrorism being a major one, the global economy and how we fit in it. How are we going to assist nations like China and Russia define their own sense of success in ways that are not historically threatening to our interests or the interests of other nations, as we've seen in the past? These are some major challenges. We're in the unique position in the world, unanticipated by most, with the end of the Cold War, to be the leader economically and militarily in the world. It's at a critical time, and I would, aside from the specific issues which need to be addressed, let me tell you which I think is the most serious problem. For many, many years, we had bipartisanship in the conduct of foreign policy. I would hope that we would be able to restore some of that in the coming weeks and months. If we're going to actually be able to be a leader in the world for good, we have got to figure out how to come together as Republicans and Democrats. It is threadbare today, and that needs to be repaired, in my view.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry we don't have time for more questions from our audience, where obviously we have a great deal of interest in this. But we had provided only so much time, and our speakers, who have been very generous with their time, actually need to catch airplanes to move on to other schedule that they have yet this evening. But we want to close now, and by, again, an earlier toss of the coin, our first closing statement for 3 minutes will come from Chairman Barber and then Senator Dodd. Chairman Barber.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you all very much for being here. Let me close with what I think is the most important thought about this election. And for you as young voters, many voting for the first time, make an informed decision. Vote for what you think's best. But don't make a decision based on false information. Chris talked about repealing the Clean Water Act, repealing the Clean Air Act, repealing the Endangered Species Act. There's been no legislation in this Congress proposed to repeal any of that. The health insurance bill that passed this Congress that Chris and President Clinton have bragged on so strongly, Bob Dole sponsored in the last Congress. And Bill Clinton stood up in his State of the Union address in 1995 and said if that kind of legislation was sent to him instead of his plan for a government-run health care system, that he would take out his veto pen and veto it. Now, this is the bill that Congress passed this year that could have been passed 2 years ago. Issues are important. Facts can be inconvenient, but facts are not inconsequential. Issues and ideas change America. Make an election decision for whomever you vote, for this office or for Bill Weld or for Peter Blute or whoever it is. Make a decision based on the true, honest facts about the issues that affect your family, your community, and our country. Taxes, drugs. I'm sorry we didn't have a question today about drugs because of the exploding drug use in the United States. I'm sorry we didn't have a question about crime, when last year, for the first time in American history, a majority of murder victims did not know the person who murdered them. Now you think about the terror of that statistic. For the first time in American history, last year, a majority of murder victims did not even know the person who murdered them because of the way drugs has led to an incredible increase of wanton, random, violent juvenile crime. These are the things that are important. Make a factually based decision and vote for what you think is right. Our view is very, very simple. We think that the way to have a better America for you and for your children and grandchildren is for us to have a government that understands that more individual freedom and more personal responsibility is far, far preferable to more government power and more government responsibility. And that really is the choice here. More government, as President Clinton proposes, whether in bite sizes or as a government-run health care system to take over 14% of our total economy, or whether we should have more individual freedom and personal responsibility. You've all got plenty of sense to make that decision by yourself, but I simply ask you to make it based on the facts and not based on misstatements of facts. Thank you very much.
Senator Dodd.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Phil, for inviting us to come up here today and participating in this 30th anniversary program at the Institute of Politics. And let me begin by saying that I agree with Haley. We talk about what we disagree with. I would hope that everyone here over these next 45 days, if you haven't registered, you would. If you know people who are not, you'd get them to register and to participate in this election. It is critically important that we in this country exercise our rights to make the choices of the leadership in this country. And in Massachusetts, you have one to make. And since my friend Haley Barbour has mentioned the governor, let me mention what a fine United States senator you have in John Kerry. And I hope people might support him. This is a very clear choice. In a lot of elections, the choices are blurred. You don't know what you're going to get. But here, with Mr. Dole and Speaker Gingrich, we've seen what they've authored, what they've tried to do in these past 2 years. The country is reacting to it. You've seen how the president has handled it in terms of the vetoes, offering alternatives to get this country moving, getting us back on track as the nation is today economically. The nation, for the first time, feeling in years that we're on the right track and not the wrong track economically. And so I think that clearly the choice is there and people can understand the differences. But let me move away, if I can, for a second from the details and the data and the statistics and talk about what most people do when they get up in the morning and sit around that kitchen table. They don't think of themselves as Democrats or Republicans or activists or liberals or conservatives. They sit and they worry about whether or not they're going to get a paycheck or a pink slip at the end of the week. They worry about whether or not their kids are going to get a decent education in this country, whether or not they'll be safe in school. They worry about whether if one of them becomes ill, whether or not there'll be adequate coverage to pay for their needs and not bankrupt them in the process. When they retire, will there be a pension there and not someone have robbed it and moved on with it? Is someone going to stand up and fight for that? On the issues of crime, are we really going to have intelligent choices and some thought given to this issue, rather than sloganeering as a way to try and win votes by scaring people in an election? That's what people, average people, worry about. That's what they really are concerned about, and they want to know who's on their side. Who's going to stand up at the end of the day when those issues are on the table and express their concerns and fight for them? That's what average people worry about. Not some sort of political contest between Democrats and Republicans and one group of candidates versus another. And I think based on the history of the Democratic Party, the last 45 months of history of the Clinton-Gore administration, and the question you pose today, which of these parties and leaders is best prepared to lead us into the 21st century, based on the record, based on the decisions that are being made, based on the proactive ideas on how to get this country moving forward, not just about what you're against, but what you're for. Putting those ideas on the table in jobs, in education, in health care, in the environment, making us a stronger and a better nation. That's what the decision is on November 5th. Not about parties, not about candidates, but about which direction we wish to go in as a people. And I'm confident that if people think about that choice, they will choose the team of Clinton and Gore and the Democrats in Congress and the United States Senate. And I thank you for listening here today.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had hoped this debate would stimulate interest and activity, and it certainly has here. And we thank our audience very much for their participation, but we want a very special thanks to Chairman Barbour and to Senator Dodd for being with us tonight. Right.
I've got nieces and nephews over here.
Good question. You raised the crime issue.